New South Wales authorities also furiously defending their record on the vaccination rollout program. The New South Wales Health Minister saying he's extremely angry at the federal government's handling of this rollout, particularly the leaking today of vaccination data to newspapers this morning without those figures first being made available to state governments. Our political editor, Andrew Clennell, is with us live. Andrew, some pretty astonishing comments from Brad Hazzard there, saying he's as angry as he's ever been throughout this pandemic period, labelling the figures he says were dumped in newspapers this morning as misleading. He's now demanding an apology from the federal government over its handling of this matter. The gloves are certainly off. Oh,
Queensland and New South Wales now at open war with the federal government over the vaccine rollout. This is the last thing us citizens want, isn't it? And it is essentially because these figures were released, and on the front page of the Daily Telegraph, the headline was, it's the state's fault. So those figures came from the federal government. Brad Hazzard says he's already rung up Greg Hunt, towed him up about it. And Greg Hunt intimated to him, he said that it was about another state, presumably Queensland. What happened here, Ashley, was that early in the rollout, because you might recall the allergic reactions or issues in Brisbane, a couple of cases, Queensland went a bit slower on the vaccination rollout. So I, probably like Claire Armstrong at the Telegraph, went to Greg Hunt's office yesterday wondering about the lockdown and asked for these figures, how many doses they have and how many vaccinations they've administered. Now, Greg Hunt's office really put me off all day. They didn't give me the figures. Clearly, they gave the Telegraph the figures. And I also went to New South Wales Health and I said, how many doses have you administered and how many do you have? Now, New South Wales Health, who was put onto by Brad Hazzard's office, said we've administered about 100,000, can't tell you how many doses we've got. And even then we weren't getting a straight answer on how many doses they've got, which is kind of the point of the argument. But here's Gladys Berejiklian's argument. She says the federal government is responsible for administering 3 million vaccine doses in New South Wales, and they've done 50,000. That's through the GPs, that's ordinary punters. We're responsible for 300,000 to healthcare workers and the like, and we've already done a third of them, 100,000. So that's their argument. So really, that's the angriest I've seen Berejiklian and Hazzard at Scott Morrison's government for the entire time of the pandemic. And there was similar anger, as you'll see here, from Anastasia Palaszczuk and Stephen Miles, the Premier and Deputy in Queensland.
Well, you asked them to tell me what is their continuity of supply. I think the public have a right to know. The public have a right to know the continuity of supply, and how about each week we get updated figures from the federal government about what the supply delivery will be.
What we've seen throughout this entire pandemic is every time the Morrison government wants to deflect from their failings, they launch an attack on the states and territories. We have not had certainty of supply to our hospitals through the vaccine rollout so far. That has required the holding back of enough doses to ensure that we can administer the second dose. I want to specifically address the particularly offensive remarks made by David Littleproud on the Today show this morning. He said that if the federal government needs to do better, then they should get an uppercut. Well, it's time he should give himself an uppercut. The states are doing what they can with what has been distributed.
These viruses are just so contagious. Both clusters are based on the B117 variant, which we know is very, very contagious. So please, anyone in Queensland, as happened yesterday, anyone with any symptoms, come forward and get tested immediately.
Now, I heard a few weeks ago, Ash, that Brad Hazzard was privately describing the federal government's handling of the vaccine rollout as quote unquote shambolic. But he wasn't saying it in public. Well, now he kind of is, because the government there was saying that they were expecting 13,000 doses at one point and they got 45,000. Gladys Berejiklian was saying they're only getting 24 to 48 hours notice of when they're getting the doses. So in that case, can you blame the states, is the question for the federal government, if they are holding back doses for a second dose, as Queensland appears to be, because they're just unsure of what supply they're going to get. Now, the argument from the feds is domestic production's just come on board. All this will be solved in the next few weeks. but we have got a serious bump in the road here, Ash.
Absolutely. I mean, to get that insight from New South Wales health authorities about them feeling like they're essentially getting vaccine doses dumped on their doorstep was the way it was described the night before, and then an expectation that they would be able to roll them out smoothly the next day. It seems like there has been a miscommunication at a number of levels between the federal and state governments.